All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Those online, good afternoon as well. Wonderful. So this evening, we're going to spend some time looking at ethical issues in public health research. So we're really just going to be scratching the surface, so to speak, but it's still going to be quite a mouthful. And I hope that, we'll be able to have quite an engaging session as well. So first and foremost, we're gonna discuss some of the major principles of ethics in research. And we're gonna look at some ethical issues that may arise as we conduct our research. And then hopefully, if the time allows, we are gonna look at the components of a research proposal, and then we're gonna talk about preparing our proposal for ethical review and grant funding. So I've tried to make the PowerPoint presentation as comprehensive as possible. So should in case we are unable to cover everything in the 2-hour slot, you should be able to follow by just reading on your own. All right, so here we go. So the fact about it is that you guys have been learning quite a lot in courses like biostatistics about data and data types, and in research methods about data collection and different statistical data collection and different methods of data collection. And you're going to be learning about study design in epidemiology and stuff like that. Now, what we need to understand is that when we conduct research, as important as it is, how we conduct the research and how we treat with the data at the end of that process can have lasting effects on those persons who were initially involved in our study. And so it is our responsibility as researchers to ensure that we gather our data ethically. Now, humans have been involved in research for quite some time, right? And for many reasons. So humans have been involved in physiological studies simply because animal responses often are not the same as human responses. We've been involved in epidemiological studies because these studies depend on human susceptibilities and human interactions. So you may remember about Jon Snow and the development of what? With the cholera and the development of what? He sparked the birth of what? Yes, but something that is very important to us today. Vaccine. No?
What was the question?
No.
What was the question, Dr. Kimberly?
No, we were saying that humans have been involved in epidemiological studies because those studies depend on human susceptibilities and human interaction. So I was saying that you guys would remember about Jon Snow and the cholera in London. So it wasn't really much of a question, we were just talking. And then thirdly, we have been involved in human research, as agents for treating humans, because in many situations, yes, animals may respond one way to a treatment, but it doesn't necessarily mean that humans will respond in the same way. So basically, animal results doesn't always predict what will happen in humans. And so you'll find that humans have been involved in research from time to time. Now, during World War II, 1933 to 1945, several German physicians conducted painful or rather deadly experiments on the persons throughout their concentration camps. And they had three main aims. So one of their aim was to see how their military personnel would survive under different conditions. The other one was they want to look at the effect of certain drugs. And then thirdly, of course, some of those experiments were outright racially motivated. So they basically, according to them, wanted to cleanse, in quotes, the genes of individuals that were threat, in quotes, to the health, in quotes, of the nation. So some of these experiments include freezing experiments where prisoners were immersed into tanks of ice water for hours at a time, and often they would shiver to death. They also had high altitude experiments where prisoners were placed in a decompression chamber to stimulate high altitude conditions. And of course, the brains of victims were dissected while they were still alive. You may have read about the tuberculosis experiment, where prisoners were injected with live tubercle bacilli in order to immunize them against TB. And of course, they also went on to remove the lymph nodes as if injecting them was not enough while they removed their lymph node. And then they had some poison experiments where intravenous injections of phenylgasoline and cyanide was administered to the prisoners. Now, this was during World War II, but even post-World War II, these cruel experiments were still going on. And I have two short videos here that we're gonna watch them. Usually we watch them and then at the end of the session, usually we watch them in full length, and at the end of the session, we have a discussion based on some of the principles that we would have talked about. But I don't think that today we're gonna have enough time to discuss everything. So we're just gonna watch them and allow you to gather your thoughts. And you'll see some things coming out as we discuss. I guess we will have to discuss as we go through the lecture. Am I doing something wrong? Guys online, are you hearing it?
No, we're not.
No.
No, miss.
No. No. All right, so we can't hear it. Let me just ask Sebastian. Let me just try and see. Thank you.
Were infected, and children were born with congenital syphilis. In 1932, in Macon County, Alabama, the U.S. Public Health Service launched what they claimed was a medical program to treat bad blood among poor African American men. In truth, it became one of the darkest chapters in medical history. Around 600 men were enrolled, most of them poor sharecroppers. Out of these, 399 already had syphilis, while 201 did not. They were never told the truth. Instead, doctors promised free medical care, meals, and even burial insurance. The men trusted the government, believing they were receiving proper treatment. But the reality was shocking. The actual purpose was to study the effects of untreated syphilis. Even after penicillin became the standard cure in the 1940s, the doctors withheld it. Instead of helping, they let the disease progress, causing blindness, paralysis, and death. Wives were infected, and children were born with congenital syphilis. The men were often given placebos like aspirin or mineral supplements. To make sure they never sought real help, the Public Health Service even worked with local doctors and military draft boards to stop them from getting treatment elsewhere. The experiment continued in secrecy for 40 years. It wasn't until 1972, when a whistleblower leaked the story to the press, that the truth finally came out. By then, dozens of men had died from syphilis, others from related complications, and families were devastated. The public outrage was enormous. A lawsuit followed, and in 1974 the U.S. government agreed to a $10 million settlement with survivors and families. But no amount of money could undo the damage. In 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology, acknowledging the deep betrayal and injustice. In 1932, in Macon County, Alabama, the U.S. Public Health Service launched what they claimed was a medical program to treat bad blood among...
As we go on and we discuss, you will find out some of it. We'll talk about some of the things that actually went wrong. And this is one more. Okay, what do I need to do now? This is one more that I'd like for us to look at.
In 1951, a black woman's cells were stolen. Her name was Henrietta Lack. What doctors found changed medicine forever, but she never gave consent. Henrietta was a poor African-American mother of 5, treated at Johns Hopkins Hospital for cervical cancer. Doctors secretly took samples of her tumor. In the lab, something extraordinary happened. Her cells didn't die. They kept dividing endlessly. Scientists call them helicells, the world's first immortal human cell line. Soon, they were everywhere, used to develop the polio vaccine, to study cancer, HIV, gene mapping, even space research. Billions of dollars were made, but Henrietta's family never saw a cent. They didn't even know her cells had been taken. For decades, her name was erased. Only in the 1970s did her children learn the truth. When researchers came asking for their DNA, the outrage grew. How could the most important cells in medical history come from exploitation? In 2013, after years of pressure, the U.S. government finally gave her family some control over her genetic data. In 2021, Johns Hopkins formally acknowledged her contribution and the injustice. But the question remains, was it a breakthrough or a theft that changed medicine forever? What do you think? Justice for Henrietta or a debt that can never be repaid? Share your thoughts below and subscribe to Medical Crime Files for more hidden stories where medicine and crime collide. In 1951, a black woman's cells were stolen. Her name...
Good. So in the previous video, 600 African-American men, some of whom had syphilis, they were being watched to see the progress of the disease without treatment, even though treatment was available for them. So they had some with syphilis, some without. And then in the other experiment, we have a young woman, Henrietta Lacks, a young African-American woman who had cervical cancer. Her cells were taken, they were tested, they realized that her cells could survive in the laboratory. And so her cells were used for lots of research ventures, including, other cancer research, HIV research, and I think development of a vaccine So she didn't know, she died shortly after they had taken the specimen. And her family didn't know that, you know, researchers and other bodies were making billions of dollars off these cells because they were selling it to other labs to do other things and stuff. So I just wanted to bear it in mind. And as we progress, we're gonna, you know, talk about bits and pieces of different things that should have been done and things that should not have been done. Now, some of these atrocities that have happened to human beings over the course of years under the premise that, you know, humans need to be involved in research lead us to two questions, really. What is ethics and where do we derive our ethics from? Now, ethics the word is actually derived from the Greek term ethikos, which means rules of conduct that govern natural disposition in human beings. Another definition from Britannica.com says ethics is a discipline concerned with what is morally good and bad and morally right and wrong. And the term is also applied to any system or theory of moral values or principles. Then there's another definition by Velasquez et al. That says, well, ethics speaks to well-founded standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do. So these are some definitions of ethics. Sociologist Raymond Baumhart asked some business persons, what does ethics mean to you? And these are some of the responses. Ethics has to do with what my feelings tell me is right or wrong. Ethics has to do with my religious beliefs. Being ethical is doing what the law requires. Ethics consists of the standards of behavior our society accepts. And of course, some person says, I don't know what the word means. Now, some of you may fall into one of these definitions, but the truth is that we cannot depend on these things. For example, we cannot depend on how we feel because we know that feelings change like the wind. So today you feel like death is wrong, but the moment somebody walks into a school and kills 16 innocent children, you feel like that person should die, you know? So feelings, they come and they go. If you want to talk about religious beliefs, we have, let's say we have like four dominant religions. So we have the Muslims, they believe one thing, it's okay to go wear a bomb and, you know, whatever. We have Christians, some believe one thing, some believe another thing. We have our Buddhists, some believe one thing, Indians, some believe one thing. So, but what about those who don't believe in any religion? How would this help the situation for those who are atheists? What would guide them, you know? And so in all and in all, we're not going to depend on religious beliefs alone. What the law requires, we know for sure, or what society accepts. We can do these two together. We know for sure that sometimes what the law requires, for example, what was happening in Nazi Germany, that, you know, the society at the time and the laws made it okay for Jews to be killed. And we know that certainly not all the time what the law requires or what society accepts is going to be what we are holding up as morals. So over the course of the years, there have been development of certain professional associations who basically looked into some of the atrocities that have happened. And they have developed some guidelines that certainly for us as researchers, we will be guided by. Of course, we also will be guided by our own personal beliefs to some extent as well. And what it is that these bodies would have developed. So when we talk about research ethics now, we are basically saying that, this is a discipline providing ethical principles and guidelines for the design, conduct, analysis, and dissemination of research involving human subjects. So research ethics, so you should be guided by ethical principles at every stage of the research. So you notice it says design, conduct, analysis, dissemination. So even the report that you are writing, you should be guided. And a human subject is a living individual about whom a research investigator obtains data through intervention or interaction with the individual or from individually identifiable private information. Now, several ethical codes or guidelines have been developed, and most of these have been developed as a result of some of the atrocities that would have occurred during the course of history. So for example, the Nuremberg Code 1947, that was birthed out of the trials that followed crimes that the physicians committed against humanity during World War II in Nazi Germany. And then we have the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964 with several amendments. So we have the years here where, it was amended because each time they're seeing where there was a little bit of an oversight, and they would have to go back and say, okay, let us add this piece or, clarify that piece and stuff like that. And this one provides ethical principles for medical research involving human subjects. And this is also the basis for good clinical practices. So some of you are familiar with this as well. Then we have the National Research Act. And this was in the United States, 1974. And this came about after the publicity of the Tuskegee syphilis study, right? This one came about after that event. And then we have the Belmont Report, 1979. And this one was mandated. Oops, sorry. This one mandated the creation of a body to identify ethical principles for research. So this one basically said that we need to have research ethics committees. And then we have the Common Rule in 1991. So these are just some of the things. So we're going to look at a few of them, not all of them. Some of the things that they highlight, we're going to just look at some of them quickly. So the Nuremberg Code says, guess what? For you to carry out research on a human subject, informed consent is absolutely essential. Qualified researchers must use appropriate research designs, and there must be a favorable risk-benefit ratio. So we're going to talk about risk-benefit ratio in a few minutes. It says participants must be free to stop at any time, and the researcher must be willing to discontinue if they believe that continuation is likely to result in injury, disability, or death. So that's the Nuremberg Code. The Declaration of Helsinki highlights four main things. There are more, but four main things. The well-being of the subject should take precedence over the interest of science and society. Consent should be in writing. Use of caution if participant is in dependent relationship with researcher, and we'll talk about that as we go on. There should be limited use of placebo, especially if treatment is available. So in the Tuskegee study, the men they thought that they were given treatment because they were told that they were being given treatment. As compensation, they were given free healthcare, meals, and death insurance. I call it death insurance because it's really money to help them, to bury them when they're dead. And they were given, so in the context of free healthcare, they were being given placebos, even though penicillin was available, and they knew that penicillin wasn't effective against syphilis. they did that. And the other thing that they did was to not mess up their study. They also spoke to other doctors in the area to prevent them from giving these persons treatment if they should come to them. So that was how far they went with the thing. But here, the Declaration of Helsinki is telling us if there is an available treatment. So for example, if we want to test a new high blood pressure medication, do not give the people a water pill. So you're gonna have your new pill and you're going to have what is currently available. You understand? Let them get some treatment and then you can test your new pill as well. Good. There should be greater access to benefit once the research is concluded. So once the research is concluded, not only researchers should be benefiting, the participants should also be benefiting in some way or another. And then we have the Belmont report, which basically highlights three principles for ethics in research. And these three principles are respect for persons, beneficence, justice. Now, respect for persons says people's right and welfare should be respected. There should be special attention to recognizing people as autonomous agents and protection of those with diminished autonomy. In the case of beneficence, it says that we should make efforts to protect the participants' well-being. The first thing we want to do is to do no harm and do good. And there should be, Francine, your mic is open. There should be a favorable balance between potential risks and benefits. And in terms of justice now, we need to treat everyone fairly. So benefits and burdens of research should be fairly distributed. So these are the principles of ethics. Now, philosophers have developed 5 different approaches. The what? I don't know. I'm joking. Yes, it should. As a researcher, you need to know all these things. Everything. I don't know about the mixed semester, I don't know, but as a researcher, you're going to need to know all of these things. So especially the 3 principles, you need to know. The approaches to ethics, you need to know. And all the other things that we're going to discuss, you need to know. Guys, this is something I'm going to tell you. This program, just don't just take the material to pass your exam. Appreciate the material for life. Because some of these things are really life-changing, depending on the path that you want to take when you're finished. So tell yourself that, I'm not just gonna study for my exam, but study so that, I can apply these principles throughout life in whatever situation you find yourself. Right. So there are 5 different approaches that governs how we deal with ethical issues in research. And as we go on, you're gonna notice that these approaches are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So the first one is a utilitarianism approach. This one is a moral principle that holds that the morally right course of action in any situation is the one that produces the greatest balance of benefits over harms. And you realize that you're seeing some of the things that we discussed earlier under the other 3. So they're not mutually exclusive. But here it says that utilitarianism does not care whether the benefits are produced by lies, manipulation, or coercion. So that's a drawback to using this approach. So once you can, first, this is what it is basically telling you to do. So the first thing, you need to identify the various courses of action that are available to you. Once you've identified them, you need to know, put a value to the benefits, put a value to the harm. And then you're going to now say, which action produced the greatest benefits and the least harm? And then they're hoping that the ethical action is the one that provides the greatest good for the greatest number. So that is that approach. The next one is the right approach. So whenever we are confronted with a moral dilemma, we need to consider whether the action would respect the basic rights of each of the individuals involved. So the American Declaration of Independence asserted that all men are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these are the right to life, the right to liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So if you're applying the rights approach to ethics, you're gonna be thinking about the fact that, you know, each individual has the right to truth, the right to privacy, the right not to be injured, and the right to whatever it is that you as a researcher and the individual as a participant already agreed to. So you don't change plans along the way and you don't communicate these things. Good. In looking at the rights-based approach, you know, we need to ask ourselves, does the action respect the moral rights of everyone? Actions are wrong to the extent that they violate the rights of individuals. And then normally, you know, the more serious the violation, the more wrongful the action. In the fairness or justice approach, it says equals should be treated equally and unequals unequally. What do you think about this one?
Yeah,
That's right. Who determines who is equal and who is unequal? So already we can pick up what the issue is with this one. Because we always think of justice as one-sided, you know, but there is always the flip side too. But there is a problem with this one. So if we're gonna use this one, we're gonna be thinking, how fair is whatever the action is that you want to do? And does it treat everyone in the same way, or does it show favoritism or discrimination for whatever reason you want to think of? Then we have the final one called the common good approach. And what this one says is that individuals' own good is inextricably linked to the good of the community. So community members are bound. They are bound by the pursuit of common values and goals. We can think of one public health situation where you think that this is the approach that is being used.
Vaccination.
Vaccination. Vaccination is one of those approaches. And if you notice, if you're going to be using the common good approach, you're infringing on another approach, which is the rights-based approach. Because the rights-based approach says an individual has the right to make their choices, the right to life, the right to this, the right to that, the right to truth, you know? So sometimes you're going to find that some of them conflict. Sometimes you find where they overlap. But as a researcher, you are going to be keeping these things in mind, and you're going to ask yourself, when you are trying to resolve a moral issue, what benefits and what harm will each course of action produce, and what alternative will lead to, will prevent harmful consequences. You may also want to think about what moral rights do the affected parties have, and which course of action best respect those rights. Which course of action treats everyone the same, you know, except where there is a morally justifiable reason not to show favoritism or discrimination. Which course of action advances the common good? Which course of action develops moral virtues? And, you know, once we try to think through everything and try to look at the big picture as a whole, you're going to realize that it does not provide you with an automatical solution to moral problems. And it really doesn't really mean to. What it is meant to do is to help identify most of the important ethical consideration and allow us as researchers to keep a careful eye on the facts and the ethical issues that may arise as we go forward with our research. Oh, I forgot this one, the Virtue approach. The Virtue approach says that there are certain ideals toward which we should strive and which allow the full development of our humanity. These ideals are discovered through thoughtful reflection on what we as human beings have the potential to become. So that's the Virtue approach. And so the Virtue approach, basically, it forces you to think about yourself and who you should be in whatever situation you find yourself in. So as researchers, we find ourselves in a divide, you know, the ethics of taking action, the ethics of avoiding action. What do we do? Whichever way, we're gonna find that something needs to be done. All right, so just having some of these principles and ethical approaches under our belt, we're gonna be careful and ensure that, you know, in operationalizing the principles, we want to ensure that our research is relevant, it's feasible, and it uses scientifically valid methods. So why are you doing this research, and why are you doing this research at this time? What problem are you trying? You know, you've heard that question a lot during the presentation last week. What is the problem? How do you define the problem? Is the research feasible? Methods that you're using to carry out this research, are they scientifically valid? And so that's why you have your RM course, and you're going to learn a lot about epidemiological studies in EPI. You also should ensure that there's a favorable expected balance between potential benefits and risk, and subject selection should be fair. Your study should involve informed voluntary consent, and you also need to ensure the safety, well-being, confidentiality, and privacy of your participants throughout the period of the study. And we're going to look at each of these now. So when we talk about balancing potential benefits and risk, there is never no risk. So when you're writing up your proposal, you're not going to say this study poses no risk to the participant, because you just never know. So you may be asking a question here. So let's say Oceana's group comes to mind. So they're talking about PCOS, and they're asking somebody if they have been diagnosed with PCOS. And that alone could trigger something, because they could have like a really terrible PCOS journey, you know, and you really just trigger something, some bad memories. You just never know. So there's really never no risk. There's always a risk. But what we do as researchers is to try to minimize the risk. We try to anticipate, we try to minimize the risk to no more than what a person would encounter in their daily life. So that is what we say. We don't expect this study to cause any problems greater than what they would expect experience normally. So when assessing burdens and potential harms, you want to think about physical harm. So for example, if you're going to be taking blood samples, you need to think about the discomfort that your participants might experience. You want to talk about psychological harm. For example, the example I just raised about PCOS, there's social harm. So you might be asking somebody about things that, you know, may have caused stigma, or stigma is attached to that, and they probably don't want to disclose that. Financial, economical, you're asking people about income and all these things. They really might not feel comfortable telling you those things. And there might also be legal issues. So you might ask people about, you know, illicit drugs and stuff like that. So you want to be thinking about it. So what you as a researcher need to do is to you're going to try to see the foreseeable benefits, which normally they don't include any direct health benefits to the participants. What you need to realize is that in many cases, your research, the benefits from your research is societal. So for example, you're going to talk about, increased knowledge, things like advanced physiological and epidemiological understanding of disease and behaviors. Depending on what you're doing, new or improved tools for prevention, new or improved screening methods or diagnostic methods, new or improved treatment methods. And when we talk about improved, you may really be referring to efficacy, safety, effectiveness, usefulness, cost. So those are the things. So you're going to be asked to describe the potential benefits and risk in your proposal. So when you're thinking about that, you're not thinking about the benefit to the individual, the participant that is standing in front of you and filling out your questionnaire. You're thinking about it on a broader scale. When you're writing that up, that is how you're thinking about it. No, this is gonna come in your ethical consideration, further in your methodology. Yes, it comes in the justification, but it also comes in when you're describing the benefits of the research. So when you're describing the benefits, it's not to the individual that is included in the study, but on a broader scope. All right. So in assessing the risk-benefit ratio, everybody on the research team needs to understand or have a role to play in terms of what this ratio might look like. So firstly, it's gonna be optimized by the sponsor and the investigator during the design stage. So you don't wait until midway in the research process, then you're starting to think about this. From the outset, this is something that ethically you are required to think about. It's gonna be needed to be reviewed by an independent ethics committee before the study starts. It also needs to be assessed by each prospective study participant. So you may think something is a benefit, but the participant may see it like it is not a benefit. And most times they see it like that because it's not benefiting them right here, right now. But they still also need to assess it and agree with it. If they don't agree with it and they say, well, I don't want to participate, it's okay. You can't force them to participate. And then of course, as you go throughout the study, you need to re-evaluate what this ratio is. Now we're gonna talk about fair subject selection. Selecting participants in your research should always be fair. So persons should be selected only because of the specific subject area being studied and not because of their easy availability or reduced autonomy. So some persons say, oh, I'm going to study this this particular community because this is where I live and the people know me and they will answer my questionnaire and all those things. No. Or you want to go in golden age home because, you know, the people are there and they're not doing anything. They're not going to work, so they can fill up my questionnaire for me. You know, you don't want to do that. You, when you design or develop your area of interest and stuff and you're going to be choosing these people, it shouldn't be because they are easily available or they have reduced autonomy. Good. You must think about vulnerable persons if they should be included in your studies. So vulnerable persons are those who have diminished ability to protect their own interests. They have reduced capacity to give informed consent. incapacity to understand or communicate. They are in no position to make a voluntary decision, and they are at an increased risk of harm or an increased risk of burden. What are some examples of vulnerable persons? Children. Well, special needs, persons with special needs. Who else? Persons with mental health illness. The elderly, impoverished individuals, and also those persons who are incarcerated as well. I know some people don't think so. They say, oh, no, they should do whatever. But no, not so. They are considered vulnerable because they are institutionalized, and sometimes if the institution agrees that they are okay with them participating in the study, it doesn't mean that because the institution has given permission that the individual prisoners have to participate in the study. You have to consider them also as a vulnerable person because, and if they don't participate, they shouldn't be mistreated or, they're going to be thinking about those things. But I'm just locked up in here. What if I don't participate? I have to participate because I don't want this and I don't want that. But as a researcher, you're going to be careful and you're going to keep whatever matters you're doing very private so that nobody gets into problems. Now, if your research requires you to include vulnerable persons, you will have to provide special justification as to why these persons need to participate in your research. So here's a list of vulnerable persons, and we did pretty well. So we did mention the pregnant woman, fetus, the terminally ill patients, and those who may be educationally or economically disadvantaged. When you talk about persons in dependent positions, what comes to mind? Use a cane. Somebody is using a cane to walk. Disabled. Somebody is dependent on the state for whatever. Yes, a housewife dependent on her husband. Supervisor. Children. Sometimes you may even want to think of college students who most times are still dependent on their parents for support. Any other situation? Patient, doctor.
Patient practitioners.
Patient and their clinician. Yes. That's also one that you want to be very careful about. So now we're going to talk a little bit about informed voluntary consent. What is informed voluntary consent? This is basically a decision to participate in research taken by a competent individual. And it is important that this individual would have received the necessary information and that they would have adequately understood the information. They came to a decision by themselves, right? They came to a decision by themselves without having been subjected to coercion or undue influence or inducement or intimidation. So the first part of this is okay, I'm sure we have it there somewhere. Yeah, we do have it. It's okay. I won't go ahead of myself. So that's informed consent. Assent. What is assent? For a potential research subject who is incapable of giving informed consent. This one speaks about the physician, but it's really physician, yes, but also for you as a researcher, you must seek informed consent from the legally authorized representative. These individuals must not be included in a research study that has no likelihood to benefit for them unless it is intended to promote the health of the group represented by the potential subject. The research cannot instead be performed with persons capable of providing informed consent, and the research entails only minimal risk and minimal burden. I'm going to read the next one and then we're going to talk about it. It said, when a potential research subject who is deemed incapable of giving informed consent is able to give assent to decisions about participation in research, the physician must seek that assent in addition to the consent of the legally authorized representative. The potential subject's dissent should be respected. So what is assent? I'll use an example. So first, we were talking about individuals who may be in vulnerable or dependent situations. So let's say you want to go in the high schools, you want to do a study in high schools, you want to look at knowledge, attitude, and practices towards safe sex. And you want to go and speak to high school students. They are not adults, so they cannot give consent, right? They cannot give consent. So you as a researcher will need to seek consent from their parents or guardian. If their parents or guardian deems it's okay for them to be involved in the study, it doesn't mean that you automatically can go ahead and give them a questionnaire. You as a researcher will also need to speak with the child to find out if they would like to participate in the study. So that is assent. If they agree, so after their guardian or parents, if them agree, give them the go ahead to be in the study, they will also have a choice if they want to be in the study. If they decide to be in the study, that is what they call an assent. If they decide not to be in the study, then the term is there, dissent. And they're saying, as a researcher, it should be respected. These things happen. The parents say, yes, that's fine, it's okay. And the child says, I don't want to participate. Oh, one minute.
I went to high school where they're doing the HPV vaccine. The parents said, yes, go ahead. But the child like, no, I'm a sport event where I don't want to take the vaccine for the child to take the vaccine.
Who forced the child to take
The nurse.
So for instance, if you're doing research with pregnant teenagers, teenagers are 10 and 15, so they don't have to get consent. They're going to have like both parents' signature and the child's signature.
Right. So as a matter of fact, you're gonna have two different forms.
Two different.
Yes, you're gonna have a consent form for the parents and an assent form for the child. So two different. And those who are going in old age home as well, if you're going to be talking to the residents, you're going to need both consent form and assent form. If the person is able of giving assent, if the person is capable of doing that. So I have here a flow chart of it's actually a flow chart of the research process. The heading says consent process. I hope I don't give it away, but anyhow, this is my question. Where does informed consent begin in the research process? Where does it begin and where does it end? Jody. Why was that so easy? So Jody says before enrollment. Is she coming? No?
The enrollment.
I think informed consent would be a part of enrollment.
Hold on, Alex, somebody before you was saying something. Did they say it starts at enrollment? No? All right, go ahead, Alex. Let me hear what you are saying.
Well, based on how I see my patients, enrollment would encompass the collection of the informed consent or getting informed consent at that point. Because
Okay.
you'd be getting them, so ask for consent at the same point before you start to collect anything or even move forward.
Okay, well, senior patient is a little different because they came to you. They came to you for service and then you are seeking their consent to do whatever you need to do to them. It's a little bit different in research. In research, enrollment actually means, yes, I agree to participate, and that is when, so in enrollment, the participant agrees to participate, you, the researcher, knows that they agree to participate, and both of you are in agreement that they will participate under whatever conditions you would have put forward to them during the consenting process. So as Jody said, the consenting process starts before enrollment.
Yes, and that's like recruitment phase.
Recruitment phase. So you recruit and you go through the consent form, and then when they decide and they agree to participate, then that's the enrollment. Now, where does the consenting process end? So we have enrollment, data collection, data entry, data management, analysis, interpretation, report writing, dissemination, publication. Where does the consenting process end? Marcel, are you okay?
At the end.
Where is the end for you? Publication? All right, so you and Nicole are saying publication.
Keep it confidential, so.
Through the entire process. Consent goes on through the entire process.
Yeah, because I mean, probably up to the point of dissemination, probably the participant was okay with it. And then suppose
No, she's explaining herself.
at the last minute, they come and say, "Please, I want to go." So at that point, they still can withdraw, so they cannot publish what they have said.
That's right. That is right. So they can hop out at any moment, even after you do your fancy data analysis and you get your statistical significance and if you know other what you have to go in, take them out of it, to the database, run you something again. Yes, miss. Yes, miss. Who's going to know what?
Like if somebody.
If somebody opts out?
Yes.
Well, for quantitative analysis, it might be difficult if somebody don't say, okay, if somebody who is very familiar with the process and comes and asks you as a researcher, if somebody says, okay, I came and I told her I don't want to be here, and they ask you and you say whatever, then if you said that you took them out, then I guess that's just what it is. If you said you didn't say that, then whatever the repercussions are, you face it. But so in quantitative, it's a little bit, I would say, safer, but it's still the same. They don't want to just go and take it out and let life be. In qualitative, though, that's where it is, what should I say? It is easier to know if you've done what the person has asked, because in qualitative, you're reporting direct quotes from people. And the samples are smaller, and you're reporting a direct quote. So let's say you're talking to rape victims, and this person go through and they tell you how the rape happened, and then they come back and say, I don't want that quote to be in the report. You have to take it out. You have to take it out. So in quantitative, you might get away, but in qualitative, there is no getting away. All right. So we're still on the consent process. Now, yeah, so we've talked about a lot of this. So yes, the participants, they should know that they are free to choose whether to participate or not. They are free to quit at any time without any repercussions. And they are allowed to make their own balance of pros and cons of further participation through a continued discussion called the informed consent process. Now, what are some of the things that we must talk about during the informed consent process? So we need to let the person know about the aim of the study. So you're going to explain to them what the aim of the study is. You're going to also let them know about the foreseen number of participants in the study. So usually you're going to talk about a sample size of 330. No, in your informed consent, you're not talking about sample size. You're going to say the survey is expected to be conducted among 330 persons because they don't know what is sample size. In many cases, you're going to use simple language. But they look at it, they're going to talk. So in many cases, you're not talking about interviewer administered questionnaire and those language in your consent form. You're talking about survey and the number of people, and it'll be very, very plain. Very plain. The description of the number of contacts, the type of contacts, the duration of the study, if they are going to be undergoing any interventions or procedures, then of course you need to talk to them about the benefits and the risks. Are there any compensation? And this is also a very sticky subject because you remember the compensation package for the Tuskegee study? What do you guys think of that? So their compensation was free meals, free healthcare, and burial money. The Tuskegee syphilis study in America, 1932. What do you think of that? Manipulation. So so in research, you're going to be careful about compensation packages. So you may want to gift the individuals from participating. If you want to do that, you're going to think about it carefully. What am I giving them? How does that affect their response? Are you going to give them before they fill out the questionnaire, or when they finish fill out the questionnaire, or during the questionnaire filling out? Are you going to do them before? Right. Do you tell them before? Do you say, okay, if you fill out this consent form, or if you participate in the study, you're gonna get this.
So like it could be your intent of the researcher, but they don't have to know, give them at the end.
What if they didn't complete the questionnaire? So as much as you desire, they answered 5 out of 10 questions. Or do they still get a pass? Well, if you plan to give a compensation, you're going to have to explain all of that to the ethics board. Okay. What you're gonna give them, why you're gonna give them, and
I mean, do we have for a researcher though?
To give them something?
Yeah.
No, you don't have.
Okay.
But if you do,
explain why.
If you do,
it sounds like money, right?
If you do, then you have to explain all of those things. During the consent process, you also wanted to inform the participants about privacy and confidentiality. You want to make sure that they understand that those will be maintained, and we're going to talk about those later on. Let them know that they are participating voluntarily and they have the right to withdraw, and they won't be penalized if they withdraw from the study, all of those things. If you're getting a sponsor, if the study is being sponsored by Ministry of Health or whoever, they need to know who the sponsors are or the sponsor is. They need to know who the investigators are, who is the principal investigator, who is the co-investigator, who are the researchers themselves. And they also need to have contact information for the researchers. They also need to know that it was reviewed by the ethics committee, and they approved it. And if you want to contact a member of the research team, they should have your contact information. If they want some independent advice, they can contact the ethics committee, and the contact details should also be there on the consent form. Now, you need to ensure that you take enough time to read and discuss all the information in the consent form, create opportunities to ask questions and, allow them to think about what they're getting into before they decide. And then you give them a copy of the informed consent and the possibility that they take it home. Usually participants are supposed to be given a window within which they fill out their their consent form and decide to participate. It's usually, I think it's about 2 weeks, but I stand for correction. I'm going to show you the document online and you read it to find out what the length of the window is.
There's something on your thank you. It says for project, loss of data collection. I think it's 2 weeks.
No, that's not what I'm talking. What I'm talking is when you approach me as a participant and invite me to participate in your study, I should be given enough time to think about it before I decide. So you don't come to me today and say, please participate in my study, and I sign it.
But really? The thing
No, if I'm ready to sign it and go, fine, good for you, but I should also get time to think about it.
So how do you work that out?
So usually your contact information is there and you just tell them to give you a call in the next 2 weeks or so.
Why I asked that is in relation to the time that we receive the data collection. Right. If I'm mistaken, the correct doing, I think that's it 2 weeks on the timetable.
For data collection.
Right. If you go the first day, you give it 2 weeks to respond.
We're gonna be in trouble. Oh, I get what you're saying now.
So can we give the preparation test?
No. I mean, what is on the timetable is really just a guide. You're going to find that you're going to need more than 2 weeks to collect your data. So it's really just a guide, and it's really just for you to say, okay, we're not going to have any class during this time. You can maximize your thing. But we're also hoping that you would have been engaging persons before the 2 weeks as well, because you should have enough time to be able to do that, right? So, yeah, but you're going to need more than 2 weeks to collect it, unless you're going to employ data collectors, which is an option. All right. So it says, accept that several days may elapse before candidates' decisions, because sometimes they have to discuss with their spouse, or if they have older children, they discuss with their children and stuff like that before they decide to participate. All right, protecting the research participants. Now, protection requires that your study be approved by an ethics committee. You're not supposed to be doing it. Huh? No, so if you send your proposal to the ethics committee and it's not approved, normally what they do, they give you some comments and they ask you to address these comments. And once you've sufficiently addressed the comments, then they'll grant approval. If you have not sufficiently addressed the comments, they're going to send it back again and say, you still have not addressed the comments, please address the comments. And you try again and you send it back and they're going to send it back again if it's not sufficient. And so you realize it can take up to a year or two before you get ethical. And so that is why when we say to you, just do the thing properly, just do it good and done. So hopefully you only get it back once. Once you get it back once, you fix it properly, you send it back, come back, approval. So that's what we hope for you. Just do it properly and hopefully life will be easy.
Different people ethics, so they will treat faster.
Pardon me?
Different people ethics, so they will treat faster.
No, they won't look through it faster if you're friends with them. No. You can go through faster depending on what you're doing. So if you're doing like secondary data, you may get what they call an expedited review. So it goes through a little faster than going to the full committee where everybody gives their thoughts on the project itself. That's the only way I know. Good. So protection also speaks to ethical attitude of researchers, sensitivity to special needs needs of individual participants, provision of healthcare according to standards, careful monitoring and treatment of any foreseen and unforeseen adverse events, So for example, careful monitoring or treatment. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, and you say, what if the person starts to have, so like I want to look at mental health issues among a group of workers, right? For my study, I need to have something in place just in case the participant may feel like they need mental health assistance. So I need to put on my consent form where they can get this assistance. I need to also ensure that I've contacted the people that I've placed there or the institutions that I've placed there for them to go and get assistance. I also need to ensure that this is not going to cost them. So if they need to get mental health help because of my questioning, they shouldn't be going to pay for whatever the health is. So you have to think through some of those things. Good. And then, of course, if there are adverse events, you need to report it to the ethics committee and any other committee that this may be applicable to. And if there are safety concerns, you need to stop the study and provide compensation for the injuries. And these two are mainly for persons who are doing like clinical trials and stuff. These two, clinical trials where you're actually giving an intervention.
Research insurance.
Not that I know of, but who knows? I'm sure that those, if you're doing clinical trial, you must have insurance. But yeah. So now we move on to the business of privacy and confidentiality. What's privacy? What's confidentiality? So privacy speaks to persons having the right to be free from unwanted intrusion into their personal life. And confidentiality speaks to persons having the right to be free from unwanted disclosure of personal information. The confidentiality speaks to once you have been given the data, you need to ensure that persons who are not on your research team do not have access to the data that you would have collected. How can we ensure confidentiality? So we're not going to collect any personal information unless necessary. Ensure privacy during data collection to avoid unintended disclosures. Keep all collected data anonymous unless necessary. No disclosure of identifying information without participants' consent. And no use of data for purposes not initially agreed. No use of data for purposes not initially agreed. So usually you will tell them that the results of this study will be published in reports and journal articles and those things. But they know that nobody will be able to identify them, right? Nobody should be able to identify them. Keeping data anonymous. So you're gonna use anonymous questionnaires or chart reviews whenever possible. Use encrypted codes as identifiers in database and in analysis data sets. So earlier we were talking about quantitative data and somebody not wanting to be a part of it anymore, and we need to take them out. So we're only able to take them out if we know what questionnaire they filled out, which many times you don't know, but sometimes you can know, especially if you've done something like a mixed method study and you are doing your questionnaire first and then the qualitative piece afterwards. So if you've done the questionnaire first and you do the qualitative piece afterwards, it means that you would have tried to enroll them based on their results. And so you would have kept another form with contact information, and you would have known what questionnaire they filled out so that you can enroll them in the qualitative piece. But usually you keep these two things separate. So if somebody gets a hold of your questionnaire, they don't know who filled it out. But you as a researcher, you will know. They get a hold of your contact information, God forbid, they don't know what the person would have said. So you keep the two separate. Oh, it's there. Keep a separate master list with identifying information and decryption codes only accessible to the investigator. And then of course, database and archives of source documents should only be accessible via strict access codes. So when you're writing up for your ethics, you need to say, how are you going to ensure confidentiality of your hard copies of your questionnaire and of your soft copies? So usually for hard copies, we say that hard copies are going to be kept in a locked cupboard in the Department of Community Health and Psychiatry. And soft copies are going to be kept on a password protected computer, accessible only to the researchers. So we have to differentiate between both hard and soft copies. If you're hacked, then you did all you could. You did all you could. Did all you could. All right. So ethics review committees. Now, review of research. These committees review your research proposals to determine whether they include adequate safeguards to protect the rights and welfare of research subjects. They also assess soundness of proposed research methodology and yeah, I was about to say something else in terms of the methodology, but it's okay. Now, there are many different models for of research committees. You may have an interdisciplinary professional review model. So basically in this model, you have like diverse professionals bringing professional expertise. So you may have doctors, lawyers, scientists, and members of the clergy as well. You may have a jury model, you know, and this one reflects common sense of the reasonable person. And currently, like today, we may have like a hybrid. So these two individuals, we may have a committee that overlaps these two above. So this slide speaks to the role of each member of the research team, which I'm sure you can go through it in your own sweet time. I just put it there for FYI. And then in this one, I've highlighted some frequent ethical issues that may arise among the research team. So that as well, you can read in your own sweet time. So normally we would have watched the full Henrietta Lacks video. We talk about some of the things and we try to understand the researcher's perspective and what principle of ethics they were utilizing. But I don't think we will have enough time for it today. All right. So in preparing your proposals, you need to know ahead of time all the approvals and permissions you will need based on your study and jurisdiction. So for example, if you're going to be doing a study in NARA, they want to look at health settings in NARA, Western region, any health region, you need to find out. So you know that you're going to need ethical approval from University of the West Indies Committee, which is the Mona Campus Ethics Research Committee. You're going to need ethical approval from that committee. Now, you need to also find out, do I need ethical approval from the medical legal body within the Ministry of Health and Wellness? Do I also need ethical approval from SARA? They have their own ethics committee. Do I need ethical approval from a health center? Do they have a health ethics committee? No. So what you may need from them is permission. Or do I get permission to go into a health center? Do I just go to the health center and speak to a nurse or speak to our doctor? No. You need to go to the department. What is it called again? the region, but you also need to go to the department, Kingston, the health department, Kingston and St. Andrew, yes. So you go to the region for ethical approval.
Yeah, but they're usually saying something.
Right, but as a researcher, you still need to say something to KSA as well. Not the researcher, but your supervisor. So yes, they will send it to KSA, but you also need to send something to KSA as well, and then they will send the permission to the health center. So you need to know the different persons that you need to go through and what is required from each person. You also need to have an idea of the usual turnaround time. I can tell you for the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the turnaround time is very, very long. You may wait for up to a year before you get, well, in my experience, before you get a first response. For the MONA committee, maybe 2 months the least. A month and a half, 2 months.
You can just send it to all the ethics committee at one time, right? Wait till the one and you have to look for it.
You could do both. You could do both. The only problem with sending to all at once, you may get back different comments. So Mona may pick up something that Sarah may not pick up, and Sarah may pick up something that Mona may not pick up. And you're going to run into, do I add what they said to the Mona one and add what they said to the Sarah one and cause other problems, or do I just end up with 2 different proposals in the end? You know? But students have done that and they never seem to have any problems. I prefer to just send it to Mona, then I send it to the next one. But if time is of the essence, it's best to just send both of them. Sarah is usually very quick as well. Yeah, but Ministry of Health and Wellness, oh Lord, I don't know what it is like these days, because the last time my students sent it was like 2023. I don't know what it's like in 2025. You also need to ensure that you are aware of whatever fees you may need to pay. For UWI, the fee is currently $2,000. And if you're in a group, you only need to pay the $2,000 once. So only one person needs to pay. Or if you want to put together and pay, that's fine. So everybody don't need to be paying $2,000. Ministry of Health and Wellness, their fee, I don't remember what the fee is, but believe me, the process is a bit disconnected. So you have to go to one building to pay the fees, then another building to drop off the receipt and the proposal. And I think you pick up somewhere different. So you have to go online, read, or you call them and you find out what the processes are. Because it's a little bit disconnected the last time I had to do anything with it. All right, so we talk on, yes.
Sorry, just to do the corrections then. On what basis would we need to be going to the FOEs?
Usually if you're going in hospitals and health centers, but I am aware that for health centers, you could just go to Sarah only. Yes, and if you're going to communities, Dr. Zaffi is probably the best person to answer this one, but when we did a community study, we went to the Ministry of Health and Wellness. So we wanted to talk to older persons regarding COVID vaccine and stuff, and we had to submit a proposal to Ministry of Health and Wellness, and it was a powerful project. So we also had to submit a proposal to their ethics committee as well. But I think she's probably the best one to guide you as to whether or not you need to go to the MOH. All right. So of course, the MCREC is no different from the other research committee. Their main role is really to review your research protocols before you go out in the field. All right, so once your research is involved in humans or animals, and you are a staff or you're a student, you need to ensure that they are in approval of your study protocols and that you are in keeping with the required ethical and scientific standards.
If you take a plant or bacteria, do you still need to go through ethics?
Plants or bacteria. I don't remember. When you look on the document, it will tell you, but I know once you're in humans or animals, you have to go through this. But the document will tell you. All right. So yes, we need to submit to Mona Campus Research Ethics Committee. I am going to, I hope it works. Jesus, I don't know. It was working when I clicked the first video, and then after that, it doesn't work anymore. But I'm going to go on the website, show you what it looks like, and some of the different things that you need to pay attention to. I'm going to ask you kindly to go on the website, ensure that you are familiar with everything. Don't wait until the night of the submission deadline, because it might get really messy. Guidelines for preparing your research proposal. So this is a document. I'm going to ask you to download it on your computer, go through it word by word, line by line, and ensure that you follow it to the T. So right here, oh no, that's not it. Okay. All right. So submission and review process. This is really where you start. So you're gonna read through this bit. You're gonna need a cover letter. Your letter is usually addressed to the chair. The current chair is Professor Helen Trotman Edwards. She's the current chair of the ethics committee. So you're gonna write a cover letter. As a student, you write it, but your supervisor will eventually vet it and fix it, put it on the letterhead and those things for you. You're gonna do a little summary. You need to ensure that you have your informed consent form, and they do have examples of those, and they tell you how to format them and all those wonderful things. And they give you here a nice little breakdown of the process, the ethical review process, so you can follow it and follow up with your project where it might reach now. They tell you the different studies that may need to go to the full committee, those that might not be needing to go to full committee, and those that are for expedited reviews. So exemption, Jody. Quality assurance studies, performance reviews or tests, performance assessment of employees within normal requirements, educational assessments of students, students on public figures which utilize publicly available information, observation of public spaces where participants can be expected to be seeking public visibility. So I guess if you're doing anything in the lab, Jody, you still need to go to ethics. All right. So it gives you everything, some of what you've already learned in research methods and in EPI. So here it also talks about risk versus benefits, and it also will guide you as to what level of risk you should be, your study may fall under. So they have your minimal risk, moderate risk, high risk. So you go through each of these, you think about your study to see which risk level your study falls under. It talks about vulnerable populations and some of the things we've already spoken about. I know, but I don't want to say it on the recording. Informed consent, yes. So it basically is a very clear guide. So I'm gonna ask you to go through. So here it gives you all the different things that you need in the title. It tells you how your title should be. It tells you what should be in your summary. So you have to do a summary. It tells you what should be in your literature review, your aims and your objectives, the methods and materials. So you're gonna use It's a guide. It says, so under methods, you're going to have your study design, your study population, you describe your sample, your conceptual definitions, which I think we use the term operational definitions. You're going to have your inclusion and exclusion criteria, your sampling technique, your sample size, procedures for recruitment and consent. So you're going to use all of these subheadings under your methodology. You're not going to leave out any, because if you leave out any, they're going to write back and they're going to say, we're not seeing where you have explained to us about your study population. And you don't want to get back get something just for that. You know, that's a lot of time that you could save yourself. So just do it properly, follow it, and you do it properly. Every single thing that they have, you ensure that you have it in your proposal. And then they have a lot of other things there that you can follow. So that is the main document. The next thing now you need to know about, or know, you need to know, that's not what I want. Schedules and forms. This is what I want. So you need to know what the deadlines are. So right now we're in September. So deadline September 8th. Meeting is October 7th. I think you guys are working for October 6th or November 10th. So one of these two, November 10th. And so that meeting is going to be held in December. So it means you won't be hearing back from them until January. Right, so that's the schedule. And the administrative fees here. So undergraduate, graduate students, so your fee is $2,000. And you just read through to see if anything else applies to you. These links are on the lecture, by the way. So if you don't know the lecture, they should be able to take you there. You can actually pay online and then you send them the receipt. So that's an option too. So your informed consent guidelines are here. So you have some examples of informed consent. You download them. You need to tailor them according to your needs. So you use the headings, but you're gonna put your information according to what is happening in your project. You have assent forms. If you need assent forms, they are there for you. And during COVID, we had to adhere to some of these guidelines. So we had to fill out some of these for our research that we were doing, but you don't need to do that now. You don't need to do that now. Right, so this is where you need to come to ensure that your proposal is the best proposal.
Within 1 year, research component anyway.
Yes. Once you've done a very good proposal, it should be okay. Sometimes you may find that you have to follow up because they may have a reviewer that is taking very long to submit their comments. And so sometimes you have to call, you know, I'm checking on this proposal, or you go physically and you speak to the secretary. She's very lovely. And you say, you know, my name is so-and-so, and it's my project, and I'm just trying to find out where we are in the process. And she'll say, okay, I'll check on it for you. And she'll check on it, and she said, I'm gonna give you a call. She will give you a call. She's very lovely. So yeah, so sometimes you may have to check up on it, but usually once it's done very well, you don't have to be going back and forth. Sometimes, most students, one time they get a few comments, they fix them, they go back, approval. So most times that's how it is for our students. Wonderful. So this is a slide that I know you know about. That's fine. And these are the links that will take you to the different things. And of course, there are other bodies in Jamaica that you may find that you need to go through. Guys in the class, I'm so sorry about this darkness. I will not use this again. So each university will have their own ethics committee. So if you want to study something among university students and you want to look at students at UTech and students at MCU, then you would have had to submit your proposal to their ethics committee as well for them to review it. So Petra, this is also a little guidance. MOHW staff facilities services. But I know that I've had students who did studies in health centers and they didn't have to go through MOHW. They just went through Sarah, but still double check with her. Right.
I was a student in Petra.
Petra, thank you. Petra, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry, thank you. Petra. Ministry of National Security. So if you're going to do anything with the Jamaica Constabulary Force, you have to submit to the committee, the ethics committee under the Ministry of National Security. Ministry of Education. I don't know if their ethics committee is still functional. When I was doing my project, I did not submit to them for ethical approval. I only submitted for permission to access the schools. So I didn't submit to the ethics committee, but it's 2025. If you're going in schools, just please to double check what you need. All right, so we're winding down. So planning and preparing a budget for a research grant. So of course, guys, I've been telling you that you need to do your proposals properly, not just for speedy ethical approval, but also for the fact that at this stage in your life, your research is not just a research. As a matter of fact, no assignment that you do is just an assignment. You never know where it can go, never know where it can take off. To do it properly, yes, you can seek funding if you need to. So when I was an MPH student, my group did receive funding for our project. So yes, it is possible, do it properly. And what was my project? Knowledge, attitudes, and beliefs of parents of adults and girls concerning HPV vaccine. What do you mean? You will soon know. It takes money. What are you talking about? It takes money. But anyhow, so Ministry of Health, they had a thing going on. Grants. So they have their priority areas, and then if your project falls in the priority area. Yeah, so this is an example of a budget. Usually each body will have their own budget set up. So you just follow whatever the requirement is that they have. But for your proposal, like to submit to the ethics committee, this is an example. They require you to have a budget in there. This is another example of a group of students that I'm supervising their budget. And then you see those money, Oshina, 400,000 and those money. And then of course, for your budget, you'll always need a justification. So this is an example of that. And you're gonna make sure that you include your budget and your budget justification. So if you're going to be applying to a granting body, you're going to make sure that you pay attention to all the requirements that they have, because each body have a slightly different requirements. Even each ethical review committee, they have slightly different requirements, and you may have to tweak the document a little bit for each committee because they want things to be done or presented a certain way. So you're going to make sure that you check all those things and you follow all of those things. So if you want to apply for a research grant, first of all, you need to have your research proposal, and we've looked at the components already in the ethics guide. Then you're gonna need to submit a work plan. So this is where your management class comes in, and you probably have learned already how to do a Gantt chart. Yes, no, all right. So you will soon learn how to do a Gantt chart in Mr. Carr's class. And so you're gonna have to do a Gantt chart and you submit your work plan, you do your budget and your budget justification and any other area that they may ask you for, because they may say, okay, we need to know each person on the research team, what their background is like and what they are contributing to the research project process. Sometimes they may ask for those things. So you just look out and make sure you fill in as appropriate. If you're gonna be applying for a grant, you want to begin early. So you start to work on your proposal and make sure it's good. And make sure that you are not submitting after the deadline has passed, because you have now reduced your chance of even being considered. So you check out the deadlines, you apply early. And this one says often because sometimes they may say you can submit more than one application. So if they have different areas, you can submit to the different areas, but sometimes they will say you only need to submit once. So you read through those little things. Of course, you're gonna need a cover letter. Make sure you've answered all the questions. If your proposal is rejected, you need to double check whether or not you can reapply. Because sometimes they will say, revise your proposal, reapply. Sometimes they will say, do not reapply, because it doesn't fall into our scope. Because you might think it falls in your scope, but they say it doesn't fall into our scope, you know? What? Then you need to go and seek a different body. No. Jody, they're not going to tell you that. Sometimes they'll tell you that, not necessarily because it is so, but because they just don't want to give you, and that's the best thing to tell you. That's the softer way to tell you that we're not giving our money. Yeah, so you're gonna look at what their guidelines are, you give them what they want, you be explicit, you be specific, be realistic. And so don't go and say your data collection in 2 weeks. And you know, say you cannot collect the data in 2 weeks, do not submit and tell the people and say collect data in 2 weeks. Just be realistic about what is happening, because they're going to want to see how you monitor and monitor their money and what you're doing and stuff like that. So just be truthful and realistic and don't put yourself under any stress.
So overestimate.
Always. Always. Right. Oh my gosh. All right, so these are references. Do you have any questions for me? Any questions for me? Yes, no, maybe so. We have 20.
What are some areas that you struggled with that just guided us from now, so we don't think questions from it?
Seeking the permission. So we have to go around. So first of all, we didn't know that we didn't know how the Ministry of Education was divided. So we have to figure that out. So they have different regions, because we were doing South Regional Health Authority. And then we realized that the 3 parishes under health, they fell under different regions under education, and so it's a little bit messed up. Right, and then sometimes you speak to somebody in the ministry and they say, oh, you need to go to the region, and then we drive up and down, go to the region and say, oh, but we need to speak to the ministry. So it's a little bit tough on this. But we eventually got our permission. That was one of them, so that's why I say check out all we need to seek ethical approval and permissions from it early before. So even now you can be thinking through it with your supervisors and try to reach out to some of them if you need to. Stuff like that.
Question.
Yes. Yes, go ahead, Vanessa.
All right, so for the MONA Research Ethics Committee, the deadline that we have for October 3rd, that we have to submit it to the faculty for them to review, and she gave us another deadline for November 7th. That is supposed to go to the ethics committee. That is separate. That's a different ethics committee that was being mentioned there from this one.
No, I don't think it is. Huh?
The third is from the state.
So it has, what's your name again?
Okay.
Plunkett. She says that the third you're supposed to be submitting your problem statement and not your proposal, and that's a different thing. But
Right, but
it,
number 7, we have to submit something for ethical review.
I believe there's a whole
So-
proposal.
so on November 7th, the committee will be meeting. And if you want to meet that meeting day, you would have needed to submit your proposal on October 6th. If you miss the submission date on October 6th, then you can meet the next submission date on November 10th. So for Mona Campus Ethics Research Committee,
So our,
these are the only two,
our submission date for our project proposal is November 7th.
which is good, because if it says November 7th, it means that you will work for the 7th, and peradventure, you don't finish, you'll make it for the 10th. But if you can submit it before the 10th, it's not a problem. But if you miss both, you submit in January. When
Maybe
is
I'm
it?
not understanding. When we
Timeline.
submit it to the faculty, they're gonna submit it on our behalf, or we submit it directly.
No,
to the research
Vanessa,
committee.
you're gonna do the whole process. No. So if you submit it to the faculty, I think you're talking about presenting it to the faculty. So, right, so in October, you'll present the full proposal, you present everything, you do a PowerPoint, you go through your introduction, your aim, your objectives, your methodology, and everything, and we'll give you some feedback. Just a few minutes. Then we'll give you some feedback, and you can fix it, and then you submit it to the Mona Campus Research Ethics Committee. You will also need to set up a Scholar account. That is something you can do from today. You need to go online and set up your account, because it takes some time to be active as well. Yes, let me see if I can find the link. I don't think I put it there. Yeah, UE Scholar account. That's where you submit the proposal through. Okay, so there's a video link. It will help you. So these are the steps for submitting. So it will tell you to go through the documents for guidelines, and you're gonna register for your UE Scholar account, and submit, and you pay, and all the fancy stuff. So it'll give you the guidelines. You follow it. This is actually something you can check it out today and set up your account today. It takes about 2 or 3 days before it to get active for you to be able to submit. So don't submit. So don't November 10 you're submitting. You're setting it up. You won't meet the deadline. We can do it before. Yes, Vanessa. So on the 3rd, I think you'll be presenting. You get some feedback. You tweak it, fix it up, then you submit it to the ethics committee.
Okay.
Submission. October 22nd, the 24th, presentation. Get the feedback.
Oh, the presentation is on the 24th, and the 3rd is the presentation is on the 24th, and the 3rd is for your submission of problem statement. No, we weren't doing the girls. We were only doing their parents. But we had to go through the schools to get to the parents.
Okay, so the population is general. The only committee supposed to be one of the people. For example, like,
And you want to go in the community?
I mean, I can't do that school.
I don't understand.
Because my on campus.
Oh, on UE campus. Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah, just the Mona. Yeah. Then you're gonna need permission from the registrar. So you write to Dr. Stanberry and seek permission.
So if I need to go to a particular faculty, For the age group that I want.
Usually the registrar will send out whatever needs to be sent out to the.
Okay.
Yes.
It's asking for you email.
Yes, you do have a UE email, so you can go by MITS and let them assist you, let them open it up for you. Each student has a UE email.